So in terms of instructors, I think one of the big things that we can do is expose them to good media, so they know the difference between good media and, some of the stuff that you might see on social.
Presented by Sacramento Educational Cable Consortium. You're listening to Lights, Camera, Learn. So welcome to another episode of Lights, Camera, Learn. I'm here with Molly Dugan. She's a professor of media at Sac State University. Molly, welcome here.
Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. So I'm going to get right into the whole idea of how you got interested in journalism and kind of where your path has taken you relative to that.
Well, I think like a lot of journalists, I was drawn to it as a kid. I was always very curious. I like to write. All of those qualities that make for. Excuse me.
That's okay. You want to start over?
Yeah.
Okay. Just take a breath and start back with the question.
Thank you. Like a lot of journalists, I became very interested in it when I was a kid. I was curious about a lot of different things. I liked to write. I wanted to do something creative. But it wasn't until after high school that I really decided on journalism as a career. I like to joke with my students that my journalism career started in the drive-thru at Taco Bell.
That's unique.
Well, I was a senior in high school, and I had a regular customer that used to come through the drive-thru, and she gave me her business card one day and said, "Call me. I'll help you get another job." And she worked at the Sacramento Bee. So I actually started out in customer service answering complaint calls about people who didn't get their newspaper.
That's a heck of a place to start.
That it came wet, you know.
Yep.
We started, I think, at 6:30 in the morning. And so I started doing that right as I was transitioning from high school to college. And in order to get to the third floor where customer service was, I had to walk by the newsroom. And everybody looked like they were having so much fun there. And it seemed very busy and interesting. And so when a job opened up about a year later for a news assistant, part-time for a college student, I signed up. And just being in a newsroom, listening to people, hearing them interview, watching them on deadline, watching them argue about what should go on the front page and what shouldn't. All of those things I found so interesting. So that's really when I decided I wanted to be a journalist.
That's great. So when you were talking about you always liked to write, or before you did that, what kinds of things did you write about?
Just the same thing that every angst-ridden adolescent writes about, short stories, self-indulgent poetry, that sort of thing.
Quite a bit of that, yeah.
I actually was on my student newspaper my freshman year in high school.
Okay.
But it was a zero-period class that I often missed, and I actually did not pass.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I may be the only person on that newspaper staff that went on to be a professional journalist, and I got a D.
Okay. Okay.
But
and now look at you, right? This is great. That's great.
And of course, I think one of the big things was I was always interested in the news.
Yeah.
From a very young age. You start with, of course, reading the comics when you're in elementary school. But by the time I was in high school, I actually read the newspaper every day, and I was interested in world events. And so I think that, for me, that was an even bigger part of it than just like enjoying the writing process.
Yeah, I think the curiosity is a big part of being a journalist, right? I mean, similar to you, I always liked to write. I actually published my first letter to the editor when I was 12. And I read the newspaper when I was 11, and I'd take it before my parents could ever get a hold of it. And it's just that whole idea of wanting to know what's going on and trying to figure out how to communicate that.
Exactly. I mean, when I think about my students and think about teaching, I can teach somebody how to write, but I can't always teach somebody to be curious.
You can't. That's true.
And so that's really being curious about the world, being interested in other people, enjoying listening to other people. Those are things that I think are some of the most important qualities.
Right. So you went to Sac State?
I didn't.
Oh, you didn't? Okay.
Did
Where did you go to high
State.
school? Or where did you college?
So I started out at American River College.
Oh, sure. Okay.
I didn't have the money or the grades
Yes.
for other options.
And for folks that don't know, that's a community college here in Sacramento. Yeah.
And but I felt I had an excellent education there. and I was very happy with it. And I transferred to Davis, which
Okay.
did not have a journalism program. So
And I don't think they do yet, right?
No, they don't.
Yeah.
UC doesn't have undergraduate journalism
Yeah,
programs.
okay.
They have, of course, the very, very well-regarded graduate program at
Yeah,
Berkeley.
yeah.
So I majored in comparative literature. But because I was working as a news assistant during that period, I started to freelance. And I freelanced actually for the now defunct Neighbors edition, which was kind of the community edition
Oh,
of the
yeah.
Sacramento Bee.
Yes.
And I started out freelancing sports preps, which, and I don't know anything about sports. I still am not clear on what offsides means or what a third down is. But
Okay.
I managed to kind of fake my way
Right.
through a few stories thanks to some very kind editors. And then I started freelancing news, and a job opened up. And so I actually started working there as a staff writer before I finished undergrad.
Oh, that's great.
And then I later went back to journalism school because I felt that I wanted, while I had a lot of on-the-ground training, I felt that I wanted some more formal training.
Okay.
So I ended up going back to going to grad school in journalism after a couple
Okay.
years.
Okay. So then what transpired to take you out of that realm, and then what were some of your first actual jobs in journalism?
In journalism,
Yeah.
well, like I said, I mean, it was the first one at the Bee was customer service, answering
Yeah.
complaint calls to news assistant to Neighbors. And then I worked at Neighbors for a couple of years,
Yeah.
covering. I went to school in Davis, but I covered the city of Colfax.
Oh,
so I spent a
wow.
lot
That's
of
quite a
time
ways
on
up.
I-80
Yeah.
in an
Yeah.
old Ford Taurus station wagon that my
Okay.
parents had given me, and. So I went away to grad school, and I got to spend a little over a year just being a student, doing internships.
Mm-hmm.
It was such a wonderful thing for me. And then I decided to come back, and so that's when I worked at Modesto, for
Okay,
the Modesto
yeah.
Bee, and then the Press Enterprise, and then
Okay.
the Sac Bee after that.
Okay. And then what clicked in your mind to say, okay, now I want to get into education?
So actually, part of it was I moved. So I was in Sacramento as working at the Sacramento Bee, and my husband also worked at the Bee at the time, and I was back at home, and I really valued what I received myself at community college. I mean, I
Yeah.
really think that community college sort of helped rescue me from what, because I wasn't really, before I went there, I wasn't really qualified to do anything. It gave me an opportunity to really pursue an education
Sure.
and to make a good life for myself. And so my initial thought was just to teach a community college class on the side.
Really?
I really had no intention of leaving journalism. And so I started a program called the Los Rios Faculty Diversity Program, where they take people from the community who are professionals, and they give them like 40 hours of training, and then they intern with an instructor at a community college.
that's
It was
fantastic.
Community
Yeah.
college recruitment.
Yeah.
So I did that, and I got assigned to a wonderful mentor at City College, who a lot of journalists know, Jan Haig, who helped me learn to teach. And then Sac City College hired me to teach some English classes. And in that process, I found that I really loved teaching.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to leave journalism. So I wasn't prepared to leave journalism to pursue teaching another subject. And then I was Googling around online one day, and I saw my job. And I thought, well, it feels like kind of a long shot.
Yeah.
But because I've only been teaching for a semester or two, but it seemed like a wonderful way to combine journalism and combine my growing love for teaching. So
There you go.
and that was 19 years ago.
Okay. So you've been teaching it ever since?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So what are some of the topics that you're teaching? Sorry. Go ahead.
Well, that's okay.
Yeah.
I teach journalism.
Yeah.
All my classes are journalism. But as I have grown as a teacher, and it's been longer since I'm in the newsroom, I've found that I've transitioned to different types of classes. So when I first started, there were a lot of the other faculty had been around for a long time, and so I taught a lot of the news classes.
Sure.
like this is how it works in a newsroom. This is how you report and write classes. And I still teach some of those, and I still enjoy those. But we also have people that are more now. We have people that are more recent to the newsroom, and in some ways are probably, in a lot of ways are better at teaching those classes because they know what a newsroom is like now.
Yeah.
And as much as I may go visit a newsroom or I may research, I haven't worked full time in a newsroom in a long time.
Sure.
So I find that I've transitioned to more of the theory classes. I teach a class called War, Peace, and the Media.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Which has been,
I want to hear more about that.
Yeah, that's kind of a central class for me.
Yeah.
And then I teach media literacy and some mass communication. But I still teach, the senior seminar in public affairs reporting sometimes.
Sure.
And so I still do the reporting classes. But what I have found is I teach them differently. I rely more on guest speakers. I rely more on kind of things that are project-based, and I'm not afraid to ask my younger colleagues for help.
That's great.
on developing those.
Yeah.
So I have far more people to share the load with now than I did when I started.
Okay.
But I still really enjoy teaching, and I'm actually going to teach. I'm planning a class that I've never taught before.
What is it?
So I don't know when I'm going to be teaching it. So, but I may be taking over a ethics and law class, which I've not taught before, and so I still like to plan classes, and I still enjoy. I find that it's something really creative to kind of conceive.
Oh, I can imagine.
Have some goals like, okay, I want students to come away after 15 weeks knowing these 5 things.
Yeah.
And so how do I get there?
Yeah.
And I find that really actually kind of fun.
Well, I can imagine too that if you're teaching the same topic semester after semester, year after year, you need that kind of element to kind of juice you along, right?
Well, it's one of the great things about journalism is that no 2 classes are the same because it changes so fast. I mean, even like a law class isn't going to be the same. Look at how fast our laws are changing.
Absolutely.
Clearly, a class about war. In fact, it's both the blessing and the curse of teaching journalism is that it's always different. But there are times when I'm jealous of people who teach math or ancient Greek because I feel like I am constantly having to plan.
Right. But as somebody who's curious, that's still got to be a plus, I would imagine.
Generally speaking, it's a plus.
But I can imagine it's also a lot of work.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the War, Peace, and Media course. What does that involve?
So that course, it was first conceived by a journalism faculty there who I didn't really know, but because he retired when I was starting. His name was Bill Dorman, and he developed this class. But then I took it over, and I basically redesigned it. It was his class was great, but everybody has to. Each teacher has their own style and their own knowledge base, the things that they're comfortable with, the things that they're strongest in. So you have to kind of lean into your strengths, I think. And so I redeveloped this class about 15 years ago, and I teach it every semester. And it really looks at how we cover conflict and the fog of war, how narratives emerge. And it says a lot, not just about, we look at particular conflicts, of course.
Sure.
We're not going to ignore things that are happening right now.
Yeah.
And certainly there's some conflicts where we need to deal with, have some historical context, the lack of censorship in Vietnam, the heightened, censorship through embedding in Iraq, those kinds of things you have to deal with. But it's totally new. It feels like it's totally new every semester.
I can imagine.
That makes it a lot of fun to teach, although, it is heavy. But even for students who aren't necessarily, reading the paper every day about the latest conflict in the world. And I do get a lot of political science students in that class too.
I would imagine.
I think it goes to the heart of some real issues that we struggle with as journalists.
Sure.
It goes into the heart of what is the nature, how can we really tell the truth?
Yeah.
What is the nature of our relationship with power? How can we, when are we journalists reporting the news, and when do we have to step out of that to advocate for something that's basically just right or wrong?
Yeah.
I mean, and so it goes to these really these really kind of critical foundational questions in journalism. So it's one of the reasons that I really enjoy it.
Yeah.
And I find that my students, despite a lot of commentary about students not being able to have debate and reasoned discussions and disagreement. I mean, we talk about really controversial things in that class, and I have found, and perhaps I've just been lucky, but I have found that my students have been up to handling it.
Really?
And they have really good disagreements with
Yeah.
one another about things like Gaza.
Yeah.
And
this is a very diverse community, Sacramento. It's one of the more diverse that people probably realize. And so I imagine that's that level of diversity, both ethnically and politically, come into your classroom.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I will say that I think that journalism students tend to, of course, really value free press, and they tend to be a little bit more skeptical of power. I'm not sure that's really necessarily a partisan stance, but more kind of I find that their approach is maybe a little bit different than the general student population.
Yeah, I would think so. So given how long you've taught this class, how have you seen coverage change, if at all, in terms of the way that journalists cover these wars?
Well, I mean,
not just from a technical standpoint, because obviously social media wasn't as prevalent 12 years ago, and now obviously it's actually directing some of the way things get communicated.
Well, I think it's a lot more difficult.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot more dangerous. I have not personally been ducking fire during my reporting. I mean, I don't think you could. I mean, I've been to some really, really heated council meetings.
Sure.
But nothing.
Nobody's drawn a gun.
No, nothing like that.
Right.
But there's so much evidence out there that it's incredibly dangerous.
Yeah.
And so it's a lot more dangerous for people to get the news. And of course, we are absorbing the news in different ways. So there's more onus on the news consumer than there ever was before. Gaza is a really good example. A lot of the reporters there, the very hardworking kind of very qualified journalists that were there. I mean, people that were sending their stories to the New York Times and AP and places like that.
Right.
Because of a lot of the infrastructure, a lot of them were getting their message out on social media.
Yeah.
So social media is a great place to get information, but it's also the worst place in the world to get information, right? Because there's a lot of people that are not journalists, spreading information
Absolutely.
and trying to frame it as something that's journalism. One of the things that you see a lot of is a picture or video of something that happened, and it's from 5 years ago in a different country.
Yep.
So you'll notice with a lot of the really legitimate stories now is they're very careful to explain how they got every piece of information.
True. Yeah.
If you read them really carefully, you'll see that they'll explain that the interview was conducted in person in this hospital on this date.
Yeah.
They'll geolocate photos and videos and that sort of thing. So I tell my students to really look for those kinds of stories, because those are obviously bound to be more truthful.
Sure. Yeah, I could see that. So a lot of what you're talking about actually has to do with media literacy, which you also teach. So define that, and then how do you go about teaching that?
So media literacy, I would say, is just being able to separate fact from fiction.
Yeah.
I mean, at a very simple level, it's just being able to say, okay, this is legitimate information, this isn't.
Yeah.
And it's also being able to know the difference between fact and opinion, because there's a lot of point of view journalism out there that we can disagree with, but there's a difference between a point of view journalism and things that aren't factual.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And I guess you could quibble that it's kind of a fine line, because if you only include information that supports one point of view, obviously it's not the whole truth.
Right.
But that is different than things that actually are not true.
Yeah.
And sorry, you were
the media literacy part in terms of then how do you teach that?
So one of the things, it's difficult to teach. What you're teaching media literacy, it's really teaching habits.
Okay.
And good media consumption habits. So it's showing people to slow down. It's testing them on facts. Is this a statement of fact? Is this a statement of opinion? How do we know that this is an AI-generated video? Doing all of those things. And when you do it, when you do that together in the classroom, they can see it, and just trying to get them to slow down. Because I really believe that most news consumers will know if they're able to slow down, they really pay attention, that they can more easily tell, and we acknowledge our own biases and the things that we are more willing to believe.
Yep, I think that's true. So, a lot of our high school teachers that we help support have journalism students, or they have kids that are even as young as middle school that are creating journalistic pieces. What would your advice be to these teachers on how to teach media literacy to this younger age group?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be increasingly difficult because, as I said before, more and more the burden is on us as consumers. It used to be that we had professional journalists that curated the news for us, whether through a newspaper or through television, radio. But now we're curating our own news. And so the problem is twofold. I think there's a problem with again, the difference between facts and things that are lies. But I also think there's a danger in where news consumers only look at things that interest them, and they don't have a broader view of the world.
Or support their point of view.
And they get a more narrow view of the world. So in terms of instructors, I think one of the big things that we can do is expose them to good media, so they know the difference between good media and, some of the stuff that you might see on social or other kinds of, blogs. And I think just really trying to, again, instill good habits and creating activities and assignments that force them to really think about things. And because we can, send the alarm that, there's a lot of things on the internet that are lying to you. And I think that all of us, and I include everybody in this, including myself, we all have, I think, an elevated sense of how well we can actually determine the veracity of information.
Do you think over-elevated?
Yeah, I think that we all think we're better at it than we actually are.
Yep.
And so I think also teaching them to be humble and say, okay, and there is kind of an attitude amongst younger people. Well, we can, you old people, you can't tell, but we can tell.
Right.
But I have found that's actually not necessarily the case. That young people do become victims of misinformation too.
Yeah, I could see that. So I wanted to ask you then, in terms of this idea of students facing this kind of amalgamation of all kinds of media, true, false, fact-based, fake, whatever, how do you tell your students the best way to navigate that?
Well, again, I think having a variety of solid news sources.
Sure.
Because I think that the more that you're aware of what's truly going on in the world, the less likely you'll be subject to it.
Yeah.
Because you'll be able to sense, okay, I know that this is happening in the world, so this story that I'm seeing or this blog post I'm seeing, that doesn't make sense. It doesn't match up with what, all of these other inputs. Yeah. So I think that's part of it. I'm not sure if I fully answered your question.
I think that's good because, to your point, and then what we're talking about is there's so much media out there. I mean, we all see the data, in terms of just how much we're bombarded with different things. And then how do we create a filter that's not going to make us go insane? Right?
Right. I mean, we're all suffering from information overload.
Yeah.
And it's just information.
Right.
And it's not necessarily knowledge.
Yeah. So I want to talk about your experience outside of the country.
Oh,
so
okay.
You've been a Fulbright scholar. You've worked in Hungary, Poland, and India. How did these change or impact your perspective as a journalist and how you approach, the education part of it?
It is different. I really enjoyed all of those experiences,
Yeah.
and I had very different types of students in all of those
Sure.
experiences. And I think that particularly in Eastern Europe, where now all of my students were born long after the fall of the USSR and
Yep.
the communist regime,
Yeah.
but at the same time, there was a culture that was created at that point, having come from a place with a one-party state,
Yeah.
that the media was an arm of the government. And then you had oppositional media. And so I think this idea of being fair and balanced, that the objectivity, that is something that American classrooms, I don't think that students perceive it in the same way in other countries.
What's the difference? I'm sorry, you were going to.
I think
say
that they see whereas here you train students to be fair and balanced.
Yeah.
And you're training them to write or report, record for an audience with diverse political views.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the training there is the political views come first.
Oh, interesting.
And so
Okay.
I think that you're training them to report, and investigate, but oftentimes it's going to be for an audience with a particular point of view.
Right.
So that's something that I noticed, again, because they still have very much a media culture in a lot of those places, that's sort of pro-government and oppositional media. And, I suppose that you can argue that there's some of that in the U.S. with cable news,
Sure.
but it's not at the same, it's not quite the same level.
Right.
We still have places that, if you look at like those media bias charts and stuff, we still have places that are trying to appeal to a larger audience.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And so that's one thing I've noticed, where I had to try to, I didn't want to necessarily change their viewpoints, but I did try to present them with a more American approach.
Did you find that was either easier or harder between Hungary, Poland, and India, or how? Because India is completely different, obviously part of geography, different history, different way it became a democracy versus Hungary and Poland.
So my Polish students were fantastic.
Okay.
So and all of my students in Poland were from Poland.
Okay.
Most of them were from central Poland.
Yeah.
I was in a city called Łódź, which is in central Poland, about an hour and a half from Warsaw. It's actually the second largest city in the country that nobody's heard of, we like to say.
I certainly haven't, but I'm no gauge for that. But
it's spelled Lodz.
Okay.
So if that
Oh,
helps.
I've seen that. I did not know that's how you pronounce it.
The pronunciation,
Right.
you wouldn't know.
Yep.
But they were all Polish students, and so they had their perspective, again, was one. And also, I mean, the Polish media has, since the fall of the communists, is pretty free. And so they... but they were also very infused, because I was teaching in English, to a group of students who were learning in English and in other languages. So they were also very infused in English language culture and American culture.
Yeah.
So they very much kind of knew what I was talking about and what I was getting at, and understood and appreciated it. My students in Hungary, I was working in an international program. So I had students from all over the world, most of them outside of the EU.
Really?
I mean, because a lot of the students were part of, I think, they wanted the education, but part of their motivation was also to get into the EU.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of students from the Caucasus region, Southeast Asia,
Interesting.
Some from the Middle East, Turkey, Morocco, places like that. And so, I can't say that there was a class perspective, because they came from so many places, and there's so many. What
an amalgamation of points of view coming into this.
Exactly.
How did you navigate that?
I think that, and I was teaching in Hungary. I was teaching one class that was really kind of about training them for different types of writing. So
Yeah.
that one was more of a skills-based class.
Yeah.
But I was also teaching an investigative journalism class. And the way that they perceived investigative journalism was very different.
Can you give us an example?
I think that some people perceived investigative journalism as necessarily being against their governments.
Really?
And I think that other people perceived investigative journalism as just being journalism.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And but they, I think that they all came, of course, with. They all came with viewpoints that were reflective of growing up in different kinds
Sure.
of societies. I mean,
Yeah.
it's certainly they were very curious. And so they distracted me with a lot of questions, and some of their questions were really amusing. This class in particular was obsessed with Florida. They kept asking me why all the weird stories were from Florida.
Well, even in this country, sometimes I think we wonder
Like,
why.
Why is it always a Florida man?
Yeah, yeah.
And then
That's interesting.
they would ask me, I mean, I think part of it, for a lot of them, not so much with the students in Poland, because I was filling in for somebody who's American who's on sabbatical.
Okay.
But I think to some degree in Hungary, and certainly in India, I may have been the first American that they spent a lot of time with.
Oh, sure.
So I had to spend a lot of time with them explaining that I can't speak for all of America.
Right.
That a university professor from Northern California is probably going to have a very different viewpoint than somebody who works in a coal mine in West
Absolutely.
Virginia. Right. Or somebody who is a farmer in North Dakota, or somebody who's a stockbroker in New York. You
Right.
know, that it's a place with a lot of different regions and a lot of different cultures within. They were very curious about guns. They asked me how many guns I have.
Because they assumed everybody owned a gun.
Yes.
Yeah.
They asked me if I was afraid to go to the mall.
Really?
Yeah,
So their
so they were-
perspective from seeing the news, or how it was portrayed anyway, conveyed that.
Yes, and if I had been just a little bit more, if I had picked up on this just a little earlier, I probably would have tried to survey them and turn it into a research project.
Yeah.
But about their perceptions
Right.
and how those were created from
Yeah.
the media that they were engaging in.
You know, I think it's similar though here, as we tend to, just as they were kind of looking at the United States as a monolith, right? That we tend to do the same thing in either regions or countries or whatever, and have a perception either because of what we read or what somebody's told us. And I think what your experience indicates is if people can get out away from behind their bubble in some way, shape, or form, either physically or in some way, it helps kind of break down some of that barrier there.
Yeah, I mean, the students were they were hardworking and smart, and I really enjoyed working with them. And I worked in Poland and Hungary like full semester, so I really did get to know them.
Yeah.
In India, I was only there for a few weeks, so I didn't get to know them as much.
Yeah.
But they were. And it was interesting because a lot of them were very interested. Their program there kind of combines, journalism, film, PR, and all of these different things. So a lot of them really weren't sure which direction they wanted to go into.
Yeah.
But they understood the importance of news because we were in a place in one of the more rural states that has. I was in a town called Bhubaneswar where there were a lot of indigenous groups.
Okay.
So a lot of them were very interested in reporting on issues that were facing a lot of, and there's a lot of poverty, a lot of, impoverished indigenous groups and the particular issues that were facing them, because that's where a lot of these students came from.
Okay, interesting. So did you see any difference from the students you had in India to Hungary and Poland?
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
in what way?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, part of it is, India, of course, is so diverse.
Yeah.
And they were very, the students there were, again, very concerned about indigenous rights and that sort of thing. So they were very interested in those issues.
Yeah.
And they were less As I said, my Polish students, I think any one of them would have probably felt perfectly comfortable at Sac State, because they were really seeped in English language culture, and to some degree the international students as well. India was different in that they weren't necessarily. I mean, they all spoke English, but they read news. They read the Times of India, which is in English, but is by and for people who live in India. So because it's such a huge country, they were very focused on India. It's not that they didn't know anything about America, but they weren't as seeped in American culture. They were giving me Bollywood movie recommendations, and they were, they had different cultural references. And we're really eager to get me to engage with their culture.
So, because I would imagine there's a very much a specificity to Indian culture as opposed to specific Hungary, specific Poland, because you've got all the EU and and Eastern Europe and all those that kind of become amalgamated to some extent, whereas India is India.
Well, it's so huge. And I went around the room once, and just out of curiosity, because I knew that every student in the class spoke a minimum of 3 languages, but most of them spoke 4 or 5.
That's incredible. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, those international experiences are really humbling because I am monolingual.
Same here. I know.
And it's very humbling to talk to students. And they were so kind because they could have, when they were working on small group activities, they could have said anything they wanted to, and I wouldn't have understood. But they all did all their activities and worked together using English.
It is pretty amazing when you see either travel shows or you travel, how many different countries where English is at least a second language where you can get by being able to speak those folks. And yet here we don't have that capacity.
I felt very accommodated.
I'm sure you did. I can see that.
And to some degree felt, some degree of guilt of not studying languages more when I was younger.
Yeah, I could see that. So I want to talk about then a lot of the things that you write and you research about. I know when I've looked at your background here, there was misinformation, writing about political advertising, war coverage. When you look at that, as you've written those and researched those, are there any particular elements that that you think are the biggest threat to democracy right now?
Misinformation.
Okay.
No question.
Yeah.
No question. And I mean, and not just. Disinformation, to clarify. Bold-faced lies, because it's very hard to maintain a democracy when we can't agree on basic facts.
Yeah.
And so I think absolutely that is the biggest threat. And it's not just having differences of opinions. We've always dealt with differences of opinions. But when we cannot get together on basic facts, and there's always been some of that. I mean, people act like this, disinformation or fake news is something new. It's always been there.
Right.
It's just now every person with an internet connection is involved.
Can do it.
And so it's very different now. Yeah. Before anybody could say lies, but not everybody had access to to printing a newspaper or being broadcast on television. And now we all have, essentially the same microphone.
Right.
And but if we can't agree on basic factual information, it's makes it very hard to create policies that improve people's lives.
Yeah. Do you think there's a way forward from that? The loaded question, probably.
Yeah, I know.
Or a tough one, I should say.
It's a tough question because the thing is, I can't even begin to think that I would have an answer.
Sure.
For something like that. I can say that I think that each of us can try to be more media literate and try to encourage others to be more media literate. I think that too, when it starts to get kind of overwhelming in the news cycle, I'm often cheered by my students, actually, because they can debate, they can
Yeah.
argue, they can be skeptical, and so oftentimes I'm very cheered with them, and I think that sometimes we don't give them enough credit.
So when you have researched and written about political advertising in particular, like you said, some of this stuff has been going on for a long time. Did you look at the way campaigns were run some years back versus now, and some of the ways that things have stayed the same or changed?
I haven't really taken a kind of historic
Yeah.
take on it, so I can't quite answer that. Most of it, most of the work in that realm has really been, again, just kind of analyzing the
Got
ads
it.
and looking for, it's kind of an outgrowth of media literacy,
Yeah,
essentially.
absolutely.
Just sort of looking at the ads and doing some research on them and saying, okay, because they're not technically allowed to lie.
Yeah.
So it's kind of going through and searching for, okay, where's the kernel of truth in this, and how far away is it from the implication of this advertising?
Yeah, I could see that, because sometimes I run across articles that do look at this historically, and to your point, those articles make the point that a lot of this has been going on since people have been running for office, all the way back in the late 1700s, 1800s, early 1900s, making somewhat false claims about your opponent, right? And as a way to get attention and to hopefully think that people will buy into that.
Yeah, but you just have to look again to see where that little fact is, and just it's how distant it is.
That's true.
From what you actually from what the ad claims.
Yeah.
And a lot of it too is there's a lot of things where they're just kind of weak or almost non-existent claims.
Yeah.
Visuals have a big part of it, right? You're putting, visuals that make the opposing candidate in a negative light. Or, there's a lot of things that where if you break down the ads, they're not actually making any real claims, but they're putting words and visuals together, and they're allowing us to come to the conclusion.
Sure.
And they know what conclusion that we would come to as viewers.
Yeah.
But if you really break it down, they're not actually claiming anything.
That's a good point. I'd never thought about that. So is that how you would say to your students, this is what you need to be, how you need to be paying attention to and view that?
Yeah, we talk about things like, selective information and weak and non-existent claims and faulty comparisons and all of those kinds of things.
Or taking things out of context and using it to bolster your own point of view.
Right, not technically a lie.
Yeah.
But certainly not something that's particularly truthful.
Right. I could see that. So I want to talk now a little bit about your service leadership and mentorship. In particular, the Open California and Sacramento Press Club. So what's been your involvement in those?
Well, so I'd love to promote Open California.
Yeah.
I've been involved. I'm currently the president of their board of directors. And Open California has a mission to educate Californians about governance and policy, and also to provide a forum for discussion about those issues. So Open California is the nonprofit that what's the word I'm looking for? We'll get there. Open California is the nonprofit that's part of Capitol Weekly, the publication, right? That covers the state capitol.
Yeah.
We also do quarterly conferences on policy issues, and we have a robust internship program. We have the daily roundup. So it's really kind of we look at it as kind of almost like a neighborhood publication for the state capitol.
Yeah.
But we also try to get interest from the wider community as well. We have a fantastic executive director and an editor-in-chief there, and some great reporters. So I'm delighted to be a part of that.
That sounds pretty worthwhile. So then what about the Sacramento Press Club?
So I'm Sacramento Press Club. I just volunteer on their scholarship selection committee. I'm not on the board or anything like that. So I'm not a super Sac Press Club volunteer, but I have been helping with their scholarship program for a number of years now.
Do you think the press club, the purpose of a press club is different today than it might have been, say, 20, 30 years ago even?
Perhaps, depending on what press club you're talking about. This one in Sacramento, their primary mission has always been and still is to raise money for student scholarships.
Got it. Okay.
That is their number one mission.
Yeah.
But, of course, they also want to provide a forum, invite those in power to speak and answer questions.
Yeah.
And provide a forum for that. And so that happens as well. This press club is, of course, incredibly focused on the scholarship element.
Yeah. So you sit on the group that chooses those scholarship students?
So the way that it works is the people on the board run the scholarships. They pick the finalists, and every year the finalists are interviewed. And I always sit in on that and participate in that discussion.
Got it. So what advice would you give students who are interested in entering that? That would give them a leg up on.
The first thing is, I think that the press club, you're talking to a bunch of people who are journalists.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to really be interested in journalism.
Yeah.
To really want to do that, and to have some evidence that you really want to do it, not just say it, but you've done some stories for your student publication. You've done some podcasts for them that that there's actually some evidence of work. I think they look at things like transcripts and stuff like that, but I think if somebody comes in with a couple of really good stories and a passion for journalism, that's really, I think, what a group of journalists want.
I could see that.
They're trying to, they want to invest in all students, but they particularly want to invest in students who really want to pursue journalism.
Do any students come in with misconceptions about what journalism is? And then how do you get them past that?
Sure. I mean, I think that there was, and there is some evidence for this, that after the 2016 presidential election, that there was an increase in the number of students who wanted to be journalists. I call it the Trump bump. Okay. And so you had students who, and I think that, you have somebody who says that, they're enemy of the people. And so you have people who, are not part of his fan club who say, okay, well, I'm gonna join the enemy of the people. Yeah. And so what we have to do then, of course, is say journalism is not activism.
Yeah.
That is, so we have to rein them in and say, okay, everything that you write about has to be evidence-based, it has to be fact-based. And yes, maybe some of those stories will reflect negatively on the politicians that you don't like, but maybe they won't. Yeah. And and a lot of it is, I had a former student of mine who works in the Capitol for Republicans come in to speak to the students, and I really we had to have a long talk afterwards and saying, okay, your interviews, you want to be empathetic to everybody. You want to understand where somebody you don't disagree with is coming from, because this was not this person that came in was well-regarded, reasonable person, but had the opposing political views to a lot of the students in the class, and a lot of them got it, but sometimes I really have to work with some students. And sometimes when I see that, I will talk to them about becoming advocates. Yeah. Because one of the things that journalism training does is it teaches you research, writing. Absolutely. Now it teaches, video and audio skills and interpersonal skills and just being resourceful. Yeah. And those things are really valuable in a variety of industries. So I think a journalism degree can serve students well if they want to be activists or lawyers or, go into public relations promoting something. Yeah. So I try to identify those students and work with them, those that really, really have an activist heart, and say, okay, you got to do some journalism to get this degree, but let's get you an internship. Yeah. And how about, okay, you can do an opinion story once a semester and that sort of thing. So, because I just think there's a variety of things that you can do with a journalism degree. So I really want to encourage people to consider it as a course of study, just because it is valuable in the marketplace.
Absolutely. No, I can see that, because I've got an undergrad in journalism too, and I ended up in public relations and marketing, but still wrote freelance on the side. But it allowed me, at least, especially from a writing standpoint, at least because you have to write a lot of different things for these other disciplines, and also being able to suss out the facts, because you don't want to just put up anything out there as a press release or pitching a story or anything like that. There has to be some basis of fact to it as well.
Absolutely. And these other fields also, have, one of the things that we focus on, of course, is ethics. And, PRSA very much, has codes of conduct, lawyers. A lot of these, fields that have similar skill sets also have an ethical foundation as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I want to talk about this latest kind of roundtable panel you were on, the Trump effect on media. What were some takeaways from that?
Well, so I had to admit, I was a little. I felt a little awkward after a while because I think a lot of my fellow panelists were activists, which is right. And I really respect activism. They were activists and former elected leaders and that sort of thing. And as a journalist, we vote. That's a private act, and we can rail around the dinner table.
Right.
But I think that it's important to not be openly partisan.
Yeah.
For a couple of reasons, because I think that your sources, if there are some trust issues can be created with your sources, and there's and there's also not just an actual conflict of interest, but the appearance of it.
Sure.
Right.
Yep.
I don't think if I put a campaign sign in my front yard, it's going to make me a different journalist.
Yeah.
But the perception is that people who, if I'm open about that, people who are on the other side won't talk to me anymore.
Right.
And they know that I have an opinion. People know you have an opinion.
Yeah.
But I think that you have to be careful not to be openly partisan, because you're just going to silence people.
Absolutely.
And so. So what I did for that is, it was in late May, and what I did for that is Trump had just made a ton of changes, and there were lots of things being proposed. So I basically just talked about the legal changes that were happening. There was plenty there for people to unpack. So basically, I just treated it as a reporter and just did kind of a reporting job on it, that this is what's happening. Of course, the big joke of the night is, by the time the session was over, I might be outdated.
There was still more going on. Absolutely.
Everything was happening so quickly.
Yeah.
But and I think that just presenting facts is valuable. I also value people who are activists and who are presenting arguments and that sort of thing, but that's not my particular role.
Sure. So what media do you think are getting it right?
Gosh, I think a lot of media are getting it right, actually. The New York Times is often the gold standard, and they are one of the places that is trying to keep up with the day-to-day that a lot of other people can't, because they have a lot of resources to do this. I think there's a lot of local news nonprofits that are doing a fantastic job of covering local things, and I still think there are some good community outlets out there. So in terms of getting it right, I think there's actually a tremendous amount of great journalism out there. There's and a lot of the national publications do a good job, and you have NPR and PBS, and so the usual. I guess you could say the usual suspects. But one of the things that's really neat is that you do have some new places out there, some nonprofits that are doing a good job. And so I think there's a lot of places to get good journalism. It's just a matter of making it part of my students' daily routine and daily habits. I myself particularly love newsletters because somebody else curates it. And if I'm really busy, I just have to open up my email and I can read the headlines. I can click through on a few things to read later. And I can get a pretty good idea of what's happening in the world. So I'm a big fan of newsletters.
Are there any particular?
Well, there's the Daily for the New York Times, and then I read that newsletter. There's new newsletter for the new PBS website
Oh,
here.
the abridged.
Yeah. Full disclosure, I'm married to the editor.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I just
Good to
wanna-
know. That's all right. Little plug there, but that's all right.
Right. So just,
Thank
but
you.
there are other places like that around the country that are popping up that are doing some really good work. And there are still some newspapers out there, and TV stations.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of there's not a lack of good journalism. It's just more. It's just spread out.
Yeah.
Differently
that's true.
now.
Yeah.
And you trust certain brand names,
Yeah.
and you have these new names that are popping up, and it takes a while to develop a relationship with and a trust with their readership and their communities. But it is more incumbent on us as consumers to seek those things
that's true.
out.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of news deserts in the country.
Yeah.
I don't want to be overly optimistic. There are plenty of places that have very little local news coverage, and local news coverage is something that people say that they value.
Yeah.
It's a way for them to get involved in democracy that directly affects their lives. But unfortunately, studies over and over have shown that there's not as much of a demand for local news. That we understand that local news is the glue that holds us together,
Right.
but whether or not people are actually engaging in it, whether or not they're willing to pay for it, those are different
That's
questions.
true. Yeah, that's true. Are you familiar with 1440 Digest?
No, I'm not.
That's how I get most of mine. So it's curated,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a business economics version, a news version, and then there's a culture version of
Mm-hmm.
it. And that it usually has about 10 articles related to it, and then it always takes you right to where it came from, and it's just a compilation each day of that kind of thing.
Well, and that's part of it too. I mean, it's not just about what the quality of the news, but also how it's being delivered to us and how we can absorb it in this environment where I don't know how many messaging systems you have to use for work, but we all have multiple emails, and there's Slack, and there's Teams, and we can just be so overwhelmed checking WhatsApp and everything else.
No, it's true.
that a part of it is news outlets, I think, need to look at how they're delivering, not just the quality, but how they're actually delivering it and reaching consumers, because there aren't very many nerds like me who will just sit around and look at AP all day long.
Right. Well, and when you mentioned some of the other outlets, AP is the one I really trust because those people, there's no particular ownership corporate-wise, other than who does own them. But it always seems to me that they do the best work in terms of getting the sources and telling a more balanced story.
And they have such a wide reach.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, that's true. So, are there any new projects or research you're working on now you're pretty excited about?
Yeah. Well, I'm working on several things, some that are probably more interesting than others to other people. I'm doing a little bit of sort of retraining on how to create really engaging online lessons. It's kind of a fun thing for me to learn to do, but that's more benefiting my students. I'm not sure that's a project so much.
Right.
We teach quite a few classes at Sac State.
Yeah.
So I'm always busy with that. But I'm actually working on a research project about the use of AI that is interesting.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
I bet.
Yeah, it's actually not. It started out as kind of a journalism project, but I have a collaborator, and it's kind of turned into something that's really looking more at students and what they understand about it and how they're using it. And there's been a lot. There's been, of course, everybody. It's a crowded space.
Right.
But we're looking at it more locally. The California State University system recently offered a kind of paid ChatGPT.edu version to every student and faculty member.
Oh my gosh!
And so we have our own bots and
Wow.
everything. And so we're specifically looking at CSU. So that's pretty interesting. Of course, I'm always looking for my next overseas gig. I don't know when that will be.
Right.
And as soon as we're done, I know I'm going to come up with a project that would be way more interesting to share.
Yeah.
I'm blanking on right now.
When do you expect to have your AI project finish?
I have no idea.
Got it.
It's slow going because the immediate often overtakes
Right.
the creative things that we
Yeah.
want to do.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's that project, and then
Okay.
of course redesigning my classes every semester.
Yeah. Do you have anything else that I might have missed that you want to talk about or mention?
Oh my gosh. Well, I appreciate all of your well thought out
Yeah.
questions, and I
Yeah.
appreciate you bringing.
Well, it was great having you here.
Bringing me on the show.
Yeah.
It was really delightful to talk to you today, and so I really appreciate it, and I appreciate what you do here at
Good.
SCCC.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and appreciate you being a guest here. Thank you. So that's it for this episode of Lights, Camera, Learn. You can catch us on Spotify, Pandora, Apple Music, and on our website at secctv.org. And you can also support us on Patreon by clicking on Lights, Camera, Learn. Until the next episode, make it a great day. Thank you.